So I watched a video the other day of an 80-year-old man who had quite an anguished look on his face, and it really struck me quite deeply. One of his core messages was that we shouldn't let the career or the salary or the corporate existence or the mundane existence that we often lead in our lives when we're structured around our work and our day-to-day job dictate the young lives that we've got. And for me, this hit home really hard, and it's something that I've talked about on this channel. I want to talk through some of those key things that he mentioned and why some of the things that he mentioned I think are true, but other things probably not so true. And we have to kind of reflect as we get older with a bit of reality rather than just something that might be a bit clickbaity. So, my name is Darren Argyle. I retired early, in my early 50s, from the corporate world, a $1 million+ salary, which was great. It was a negotiation. Since then, or before leaving then, I was able to build multiple income streams either to make sure that my life after going into retirement was as free as it possibly could be. The first thing that he talks about is don't be chained to a salary. And I think this idea of being chained to a salary is kind of good and bad in some ways, because let's be clear, I mean, I've gone through a corporate life myself, and I guess that I was chained to a corporate salary, but I also liked the predictability of the salary coming in. It meant that, generally speaking, my life was pretty free. I enjoyed certainly my late 20s, early 30s, until children came along, as in the money constraints that you have. But it gives you this predictable income, so I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. One of the things that I advocate on this channel is having a career. I don't think having a career is a bad thing. In fact, I think you should still pursue that, but not without doing other things that I'll talk about. So that was the first thing. Let's talk about time, because time was another thing that this old man talked about, and how it takes all of your time. Of course it takes all of your time if you're going into an office and you're commuting, like I did in the early days in London. But I didn't mind that. At the time, I was young, I was enjoying the fresh new commute. For me, I was traveling into London. I hadn't done that previously in other roles. So for me, I got my suit on, I was going into London. I felt like I was doing something, right, elevating my status. And status is a big thing that comes into a lot of corporate roles as well. We shouldn't take that away from it. So I thought that bit was not particularly good in terms of time, because if you're able to mix your working from home through going into the office, then I think you get the time balance. And then the other thing that he talks about in the video, and it was only a short video, by the way, I'm elaborating a lot more than he talks about in the video, but I'm trying to pick out some of the key things. One of the things he said is the idea of late stage retirement into your 60s or even 70s is an outdated one. And if you follow that principle, then by the time you get to your 60s and 70s, when you're ready for retirement, then you'll be too old to travel. And I heard this, I think he's spot on with that. This idea of traveling when you're young does make a lot of sense, as in it's a different experience when you're traveling when you're young to when you're traveling when you're older. But I think that's still relative as well, because if you travel when you're young, you can stay in these hostels, you don't mind kind of bumming around a little bit. I heard this story of a guy who was in his early 20s, his friends had said, come on, let's all go traveling together. And this one guy went, nope, I'm going to put my time into building up my kind of corporate profile, and I'm going to buckle down and do that. So his friends went off, and then they went round, the typical, it was Asia trip for quite a few months, 6 months. They ended up packing their jobs in and doing this trip. He didn't go. They came back, talked about how wonderful it is, and a bit of a realization at that time that maybe he made a mistake and he'd wish he'd gone, but he thought, it doesn't matter, I've still got plenty of time, I'll get a few more years into my career and then I'll go. So he decided to do that, and I think he chose to go do his travelling, whether it was a sabbatical, I didn't quite get the full detail, it was about 35. Now, he did try the hostel experience, but at that age, it's not quite the same, of course. So he'd missed out on this kind of different kind of lifestyle. Now, in this example of the older man travel, the corporate world will stop you from traveling. I've just given all the reasons why that's not the case. But travel at any age can be quite different. You appreciate things when you get 50 and older that you would never have probably appreciated when you're younger, and vice versa. So I think that's all relative. The one thing that I think, if I was to look across all of this, and Marcus Aurelius made this point. Marcus Aurelius, the great philosopher and Caesar, said, I want to be reminded of my death every day. And by doing that, I'll know that I've only got a finite time in this world, and I'll use every day, every hour, and I will value time to its most optimal. So he actually hired Marcus Aurelius, this kind of almost like a court gesture in some ways, who would repeatedly be whispering in his ear most of those days, reminding him of the fact that he was just a mere mortal and his time on this planet was finite. And I thought that was a really good way to frame it. And we don't do this. We continue to believe that we are invincible. Private insurance for medical is something else you get through corporate, so that's quite a good thing to have as well. So that shouldn't be undervalued either, and you have to pay for it yourself. So what does all this mean? As you can hear, that I wasn't fully on board with this old man's video of exactly what he said, but I want to caveat that, because although I wasn't on board with everything that he said about having a corporate life, not retiring later, I think the bit that he missed out in that almost rant that he gave, I guess, on the video, was the fact that what is the alternative? It's okay just saying don't live as a corporate slave to the salary, but what is the alternative? Now, most people just assume the alternative is, I don't have a job at all, I just bum around and live on benefits. Of course, I'm sure that's not what most people want to do, but people do end up doing that, because in some countries you are rewarded more for not working than you are for working. And that was certainly the case in the UK. Most people think the alternative is building a business, being an entrepreneur in some case. Whilst I think that's absolutely true, and if you look at the greatest wealth on the planet, it's usually with people who are big investors. Usually they put their money in the Vanguard or S&P Global, and that compounding interest over the years, over 10, 20 years, has compounded to a point where they're extremely wealthy. That's not picking shares, by the way, that's putting it into an index fund. That means that it's spread across a portfolio. The trick there is that you've left it long enough so that that compounding interest has gathered steam over time and given you a good return. Anybody who tries to trade stocks is a mug, actually, so don't do that. And maybe I'll do a video on that, but it doesn't work. Picking stocks doesn't work, and you've only got to look at Warren Buffett, who lost half of his fortune. I think he lost about 22 billion from his fortune in the 2008 dip, but that's all been made back now. So, as long as you can wait things out long enough, then that's fine. So entrepreneurship was the alternative, or seen as the only alternative. Is there a kind of third or fourth way? Now, I believe there is a third or fourth way, and the third or fourth way is doing both. In other words, have the corporate career, have the regular income coming in, but build an outside interest that's likely to generate some income in the future. Now, that could be just a hobby, because plenty of hobbies these days turn out to be potentially income generating assets in themselves. So don't think that just taking up a hobby will not eventually lead to anything in the future, because it could, but you just need to have something else outside of your corporate career. Now, it could be investing, and I'm not talking about picking stocks, but that could be your interest. It's an interest in financial assets and how they compound over time. And everybody should learn about how money works anyway. I've read tons of books, and maybe I'll put a video on here of some of the most impactful books that I've had. In fact, I won't, not if, but I will do that, because I think that's really important. So certainly reading the right books and educating yourself on financial matters is important. Other things to think about is, once you understood how finance works and you can make money, also thinking about, how do I build assets of value from my experience? Now, one of the things, the frames that I always like to give is, look back 5 to 7 years is probably a good time frame, and think about that version of you. That version of you, what did they need to help them become better? What could have they had to help them to have progressed further in their career, help them start that business, help them make more money from stocks, shares, or whatever it is, but improve their life in some way? It could be things like fitness. What are the things that you've learned now about fitness that would help that person 5 to 7 years ago? And just be thinking about those things as you go along. And there's lots of issues and concerns, but it's your story that will connect to that particular problem or issue that you faced. And you have a solution, you have an idea of how that can be solved. And I think that's very much the first start of you beginning to come up with an asset of value that you can put out there to the world with your story and your narrative. And the really good thing about that particular idea is that you don't have to do that when you're young. In fact, being older can be an advantage, because you've got more lived experience, you've got more credibility, especially if you put the work into your networks, into your relationships. And once you've got that credibility, you can then share it with the world. And if it resonates and people see value in it, it's going to help them build a business, it's going to help them accelerate their career, it's going to help them be better financially, it's going to help them build relationships, it's going to help them be fitter. All of those things you can start to build some assets of value that people can either download, consume maybe through some kind of learning or course or something like that. And of course, I've built a very successful global business, training business, 7-figure training business that's now in over 80 countries around the world, where we're teaching the next generation of cybersecurity leaders, because that was my profession, to be more successful. And there's lots of strategies of how you build that business to become leveraged with an operations team. So it's not just you, it's an entire team. And that's a video for another day. But anyway, I do think there's another way. I don't think just being a corporate slave is necessarily bad. I think there's different opportunities, and I call this a portfolio career. And you can have a portfolio career even when you're in a job. And by the way, there's strategies for how you can do that within a job. As you build a business, you can become a non-exec director of that business and put in place a nominal director, which either could be your spouse or somebody else. So it becomes compliant with other organizations that might not allow you to be a company director. So think about that as well. There's ways that you can structure it and let other people run that business, but using your assets. Hopefully you found this video helpful. I'm going to be doing these at least twice, maybe 3 times a week. Hopefully there's some learned wisdom in this. I want people to get value from this. So there's going to be some really deep dives on some of these topics, especially around how you can build wealth through better financial planning, certainly through building assets of value. Lots of tips I can give around health, and I'm mid-50s now and I'm in the best shape of my life. I want all of you to benefit from all the experience that I've had, and successful business. Hopefully I've got successful relationships, certainly with my daughters, my wife and the rest of my family. So you can benefit from all this. There are things that haven't gone perfectly, and I'll talk about those things as well. I mean, we all have ups and downs. The trick there, by the way, is how you get back up. As Rocky famously said in his films, it's how you get back up once you get knocked down. There's a song about that as well, I think. I get knocked down, get out, get back up again. I think that's the song. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Subscribe. I'd love to hear your comments. Anything that you think would help others in this situation on any topic that I've got now. Any other videos that you'd like for me to deep dive on, I can certainly do that. Like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell, because then you'll get to see them first. And if you get to see them first, you'll be able to implement some of these strategies before others. And you might just like this video here. This one, right here. Okay, cheers, Darren, out.